The Warren Commission did something completely crazy and surrealistic, unique in criminology. Oswald arrived at the Paine residence in Irving wearing his light gray jacket on November 21st, and he left with it for the Texas School Book Depository the following day. The dark blue jacket, or coat, Commission Exhibit 163, was in his room at the boarding house in Oak Cliff. The Warren Commission adopted a scenario that reverses the locations of these two jackets. It placed the dark blue, Commission Exhibit 163, in Irving, while placing the light gray, Commission Exhibit 162, in Oak Cliff. To achieve this, the Warren Commission was forced to invalidate all eyewitnesses. Let us review, in a table, the testimony regarding the jacket Oswald wore in Irving and at the boarding house. Beyond the jacket issue itself, the table shows that the Warren Commission selectively presented or withheld Commission exhibits in order to force alignment with its narrative. We will carefully and in detail revisit the eyewitness testimonies after establishing a clear understanding of the exact events that took place during the Tippit murder incident. We will begin by examining the single solution that successfully resolves all the inconsistencies. 1. The two jackets. 2. The honking of the police car. 3. The two Oswalds at the Texas Theater. 4. The Carl Mather incident. And 5. The forgeries of the FBI 301 FD forms. We will ultimately arrive at a finding that completely refutes the lone gunman theory. This conclusion is certain to astound everyone. Let us dive into the surreal and unrestrained world of the Warren Commission. 1. The Carl Mather incident. As detailed in Section 3.3.1 of the book, this episode proves with 100% certainty that a CIA operation linking Tippit and Oswald was underway in Oak Cliff on November 22, 1963. Tippit wasn't on a routine patrol. He was functioning as a CIA asset. 2. The honking patrol car. A police vehicle pulled up in front of Oswald's boarding house exactly when he was inside and honked in a coded signal. This happened at a time when police officially had no knowledge of Oswald's address, and they were supposedly still searching for him around 1 p.m. The odds of this being random are 0. It was intentional coordination. 3. The Texas Theater anomalies. Witnesses, including theater manager Warren "Butch" Burroughs and patron Jack Davis, testified that Oswald entered the Texas Theater before 1:20 p.m., a timeline impossible if he had just shot Tippit. In fact, Burroughs testified that Oswald bought popcorn from him at 1:15 p.m. An official Dallas Police Department intelligence report, filed on November 23, 1963, by Detective L.D. Stringfellow, states, Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the theater, even though other reports claim he was arrested in the auditorium. Burroughs also described seeing a second Oswald-like figure being arrested, like his brother, while Bernard J. Hare, owner of a hobby shop 2 doors down, saw an arrested Oswald being led out through the back alley, despite police records showing the real Oswald was escorted out the main entrance. 4. There is absolute inconsistency regarding which jacket Oswald was wearing on his route from the TSBD to the Texas Theater. This will also prove to be the key to the case, and we will examine it in detail below. Students of the JFK assassination case will notice that I have not mentioned at all the colossal issue of the exact time when Tippit was killed. This is deliberate because, as we shall see, the precise moment at which Tippit was executed plays absolutely no role in solving the case. Whether Tippit was shot at 1:05 p.m. or at 1:16 p.m. makes no difference whatsoever to our analysis. Nevertheless, We will examine the forgeries the CIA committed on FBI FD 301 forms in order to alter the record and set the time of Tippit's death 10 minutes later. There must have been a reason for them to commit such felonies. Any credible theory must explain the above-mentioned 4 points. The official story explains none of them. The solution hinges on a simple yet irrefutable contradiction involving Lee Harvey Oswald's 2 jackets. The light-colored one, Commission Exhibit 162, and the very dark one, Commission Exhibit 163. Fortunately for us, these jackets were completely different from each other, as evident in the photos. But before diving into the jackets, let's briefly recap what the conclusion regarding Duran's stance reveals. This conclusion unlocks a cascade of insights. On November 22nd, the CIA had a team in Dallas supporting a fake assassination attempt, a false flag operation, against the president, based on Desmond Fitzgerald's earlier plan. Parallel to this was a sub-operation, orchestrated from the shadows, designed to push Oswald out of the U.S., specifically to Cuba. As analyzed in the previous chapter, Oswald's continued presence in the U.S. after the fake attempt would have undermined the false flag goal, so his exfiltration was essential. From Oswald's viewpoint, he believed November 22nd was his escape day. We know from James Angleton's sworn testimony to the Church Committee that Oswald had been arrested in Mexico City and returned to the U.S. by car. Oswald was aware the FBI knew about his attempt on General Walker, fueling his anxiety. He couldn't understand why he hadn't been arrested yet, but he suspected he was being groomed for some purpose. The most plausible pretext for this sub-operation was a gun-running scheme active at the time, which involved Lawrence Reginald Miller and entangled Jack Ruby, and was witnessed by John Elrod. The exact cover story doesn't matter. What we know definitively is that the CIA manipulated some operation to export Oswald to Mexico and onward to Cuba. Participants thought it was a genuine illegal venture, unaware of the CIA's strings. Crucially, the conclusion regarding Duran's stance implies that the CIA team brought along Oswald's imposter, the same one used in the September 18th framing incident in Mexico City. Thus, when the real assassination occurred, both the CIA team and Oswald plunged into panic, irrespective of whether Oswald fired a shot at JFK, a question we won't address here. Oswald would have instantly realized he was being set up as a patsy, facing likely elimination. The timeline of events, according to witness testimony accepted by the Warren Commission, is as follows. Morning. Oswald leaves for work from Irving, wearing the light-colored jacket, Commission Exhibit 162. This was confirmed by his wife, Marina. 1 p.m. A man identified as Oswald arrives at his boarding house in Oak Cliff. His landlady, Irving Roberts, was adamant in her testimony. The man entered without a jacket. 1:02 p.m. The man exits Oswald's room, now wearing a jacket. Roberts described it as a dark coat or dark jacket. Since he entered without one, he must have taken one from the room. Logically, the dark jacket, Commission Exhibit 163. 1:06 p.m., or 1:16 p.m., according to Warren Commission. At the corner of 10th and Patton, Oswald shoots Officer Tippit. All witnesses to the murder described the shooter as wearing a light-colored jacket. Shortly after, the killer discards a jacket nearby. Police recover it, and it is identified as the light-colored jacket, Commission Exhibit 162. This presents an unsolvable paradox for the official theory. How can a man have left Irving wearing Commission Exhibit 162, then entered his room at the boarding house wearing only his shirt, and come out of the room once again wearing Commission Exhibit 162, which was found near the scene of Tippit's murder and was identified by Marina? When Irving Roberts gave her testimony, the commission showed her Commission Exhibit 162, but she didn't recognize it, insisting that the jacket was darker. The next logical step for the commission would have been to show her Commission Exhibit 163 for identification. They did not do so. It is 100% certain this was done deliberately. It was yet another instance, among more than 1,000, in which the Warren Commission conducted a dishonest investigation, as we have repeatedly seen in the previous chapters. Commission Exhibit 163 was found on the 16th of December 1963, 24 days after Tippit's murder, in the busy Domino Room in the Texas School Book Depository. There is absolutely no explanation for why it took 24 days to be found, when the building had been thoroughly searched after the president's assassination by the Dallas Police Department, FBI, Secret Service, and the sheriff, and when the Domino Room was a very frequented room. The Warren Commission counsel did ask Roberts about Shirt Commission Exhibit 150, which she recognized as the one worn by the man entering at 1 p.m., but Roberts addressed him as Oswald, and he said nothing in response, meaning no voice recognition occurred. The delayed discovery of Commission Exhibit 163 at the TSBD changes nothing fundamental. The core issue isn't precisely which jacket the man found and wore. It's that he entered without one and exited with something other than CE 162. In other words, the moment Oswald entered the room without a jacket and came out with a jacket, the case is closed. The jacket he left with was definitely not CE 162. Marina Oswald, who regularly washed Commission Exhibit 162, identified it not just by color, but as the exact physical item recovered by police near 10th and Patton. She also confirmed that Oswald was wearing Commission Exhibit 162 when he arrived in Irving. In short, Oswald wore Commission Exhibit 162 when leaving Irving, and the Tippit shooter wore the same Commission Exhibit 162 when fleeing the scene. We will examine the Warren Commission's claims in depth later. The man entering the boarding house at 1 p.m., wearing only a shirt, was not the same as the man who killed Tippit at 1:06 p.m., or 1:16 p.m., according to Warren Commission, who was definitely wearing Commission Exhibit 162. There's only one solution. The boarding house entrant was the imposter, and the Tippit shooter was the real Oswald. Reconstructing the events of November 22nd. The conclusion regarding Duran's stance establishes that a CIA team was in Dallas on November 22nd to support the false flag operation. This team included an imposter who had previously been used to impersonate Oswald in the September 18th incident. A parallel sub-operation was also in motion to exfiltrate Oswald to Cuba, likely under the pretext of a gun-running deal. With this context, the events become clear. 1. The imposter's mission. After the assassination, the CIA shifted to damage control. The imposter was sent to Oswald's room to retrieve and destroy incriminating documents, perhaps a diary from his Mexico City trip, where he was secretly arrested. The man Roberts saw at 1 p.m. was this imposter. He entered without a jacket. The honking patrol car signaled his urgent exit. He grabbed the dark jacket, Commission Exhibit 163, in order to conceal the documents, and headed to the Texas Theater to locate a contact, explaining the early sightings there. 2. Oswald's plan. Meanwhile, the real Oswald, still in his light-colored jacket, Commission Exhibit 162, believed his escape to Mexico was underway. He made for a prearranged rendezvous, the intersection of 10th and Patton, where he expected a contact from the gun-running operation. Taxi driver William Scroggins was reportedly waiting there, tasked by a Ruby associate to pick up someone, clearly Oswald. Most likely, this spot was one of several alternate meeting points with the gun-running gang, known to the CIA. 3. The fatal confrontation. Officer Tippit, a CIA asset, was at the intersection, probably assigned to locate the contact. When Oswald arrived and saw a police car instead of his ride, his paranoia, already acute from Mexico City, kicked in. He may have recognized Tippit, perhaps from the Dobbs House restaurant, and assumed it was a setup to silence him. In a split-second decision, Oswald approached the car and fired preemptively, killing Tippit before, in his mind, being killed himself. Conclusions regarding November 22nd and the Texas School Book Depository. The primary conclusion from the analysis of the Tippit murder is a definitive confirmation of conclusion regarding Duran's stance. The CIA had an operation, and the September 18th imposter was present in Dallas on November 22, 1963. The first thing that comes to everyone's mind after the above conclusion is this. Hang on a second. Why wasn't the imposter inside the Texas School Book Depository? And indeed, credible witnesses, Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig, Richard Randolph Carr, Helen Forrest, James Richard Worrell, reported seeing a man resembling Oswald leaving the Texas School Book Depository and entering a station wagon immediately after the president's assassination. This testimony is particularly compelling because, in the years following 1963, the notion of an imposter operating as part of an imposter method was not publicly known. Testimony given without awareness of such a method carries different evidentiary weight from testimony offered once the concept is widely discussed. Furthermore, the fact that these eyewitnesses, especially Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig, remained steadfast until the end in their testimony that they saw Oswald enter a station wagon, even after learning that dozens of other witnesses had seen him leave on foot, demonstrates their unshakable conviction in what they personally experienced. The JFK assassination research community should closely examine the period from 12:10 p.m. to 1 p.m., considering the strong likelihood that the imposter was inside the Texas School Book Depository. If so, what choreography would the imposter have adopted to avoid revealing his role? What operational solution concepts would fit the observed record? It is absolutely certain that there was at least one shot fired at the president from the front. The most likely scenario is that there were two shots from the front, the two fatal shots to the throat and the head. But let us suppose for a moment that all the shots came from the 6th floor. In any case, a staged fake assassination attempt could easily have included deliberate misses or blank shots. It is certain that there were 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and let us assume, for the sake of argument, that those were the damaging ones. Who was more likely to have fired those shots, Oswald or the CIA imposter? Let's look at the evidence. 1. Oswald wanted to defect to Cuba, whereas the imposter was participating in a fake assassination operation. It is obvious that the person most likely to have been on the 6th floor was the imposter. 2. It is clear that the imposter was not recruited into the CIA through the agency's standard procedures and testing. The only reason he was hired was that he physically resembled Oswald. Therefore, there is absolutely no guarantee that the imposter had the appropriate psychological profile to be a CIA agent. 3. There is highly credible testimony from Fred Moore, an employee at the Jiffy Store at 310 South Industrial Boulevard, about a mile southwest of the Texas School Book Depository, who stated that Oswald showed up at 9:30 a.m. on November 22, 1963, and bought 2 beers. When the clerk asked for ID, Oswald showed a driver's license in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, even though the Warren Commission claimed Oswald never had a driver's license. An employee of the Texas Department of Public Safety told prosecutor Jim Garrison that on November 27, 1963, he saw Oswald's driver's license. Additionally, 2 other witnesses reported seeing Oswald at the Top 10 record store at 7:30 a.m. on November 22, 1963. The above evidence means that the imposter we know about did not have the psychological profile of a professional CIA agent. He was drinking alcohol at 10 a.m. on November 22, 1963. In other words, even if we assume there were only 3 shots and all came from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, it is far more likely that the imposter fired them than Oswald did. Thus, the Warren Commission's conclusion is completely worthless, something to be expected, since, as we have seen, the Commission's chairman was functioning as a CIA asset. Conclusion regarding Tippit's murder. The CIA asset who impersonated Oswald and who had participated in the September 18th operation in Mexico City also took part in a CIA operation in Dallas on November 22, 1963. The imposter was inside the Texas School Book Depository building at 12:30. Questions for clarification. A few questions naturally arise here. Why did the imposter put on the jacket if he wasn't there for a pistol? In my view, he entered primarily to collect documents, a step likely built into the original plan. Post-assassination, executing this seemed prudent for cleanup. Obviously, he put on the jacket to hide the documents somewhere. But what documents could Oswald, an unwitting pawn with no conscious CIA ties, have possessed? Things weren't that simple. Oswald's Mexico City arrest and car return complicated matters. A CIA agent had likely scouted his room days earlier, spotting items needing destruction, like a diary of Mexican events. Such items couldn't be removed before November 22nd without risking exposure. Why did Oswald bring a revolver to the Texas School Book Depository? This was entirely predictable given his mindset. Recall his stance in Mexico City. Nikolai Leonov recounted how Oswald claimed even the hotel maid was an FBI informant spying on him. Let us recall that on September 28th, inside the Soviet embassy, Oswald drew his revolver while in a state of nervous breakdown. Professor Paul Gregory testified that Oswald spotted an FBI car tailing Oswald in summer 1962, an incident absent from FBI files. Oswald's paranoia didn't ease after his Mexico arrest. It worsened. The November 9th letter was his way to probe FBI reactions and signal the KGB about his detention. By October and November, his tension was at a peak. That's why he drew his revolver on Tippit and threatened police at the Texas theater. For months, he'd been in the same heightened state as on September 28th. If anything, the arrest in Mexico City confirmed and amplified his persecution complex. A logical question is why the CIA echelon wanted to locate Oswald's contacts. This was the most logical move they could make at that moment. It is obvious they had understood that the Helms-Angleton project had been hijacked, and the most reasonable thought at that moment was that the hijackers must have intended to murder Oswald. Why? The hijackers knew that the state would yield and order the cover-up of the false flag fake assassination attempt project for national security reasons. However, there was a danger that everything would spiral out of control as long as Oswald was alive. There was no chance the state would succeed in the cover-up as long as Oswald lived. In other words, the hijackers would have to facilitate the state in implementing the forced cover-up. If they managed to murder Oswald, the cover-up was a done deal. There was no chance the state would genuinely search for hijackers, because that would automatically mean revealing the false flag assassination attempt. Therefore, in the eyes of the CIA echelon, the hijackers would have a killer stationed at Oswald's contact points with the gun-running gang to murder him. Thus, the most reasonable move for the echelon at that moment would be to locate the killer at the contact points and in doing so, they would have a lead to reach the hijackers. Note: just as the CIA knew Oswald's contact points with the gun-running gang, it is logical that the hijackers would know them too. Therefore, only at these contact points would the hijackers have the opportunity to murder Oswald. And, consequently, at these points, the CIA echelon would have the ability to arrest the potential assassins and unmask them. Attention! This is the thought process being applied by the head of the CIA echelon in Dallas. It does not need to be absolutely rational. At that moment, he was making split-second decisions. It is obvious that he would make mistakes as well. But the plausibility of this thought process is supported by the following. Oswald himself would have thought the same thing. That perhaps at the contact point, they might manage to get him out of the US as planned, but that it was more likely they had set him up and were going to murder him. That is why Oswald went to the contact points with the hope of escape, but also with the strong fear that they would murder him, and for this reason, he preemptively murdered Tippit. Naturally, at that moment, it would have been unlikely for Oswald to have considered the scenario that Tippit was a member of the CIA echelon. How reasonable this scenario was is demonstrated by the fact that Oswald was indeed murdered by Ruby 2 days later. I remind you that when Ruby learned Oswald had been arrested, he collapsed. He was in a state of frenzy, and when he met with his sister, they cried together, etc., because they understood that Ruby was trapped. The most likely scenario, among various possible variations, is that the hijackers utilized a cutout who manipulated Ruby, revealing to him that the relationship between Ruby and Oswald on November 22nd was known, and that the electric chair awaited him unless he murdered Oswald. And indeed, the danger was real, because it is obvious that Ruby had organized Oswald's escape to Cuba on November 22nd. Therefore, if the cutout told him that he knew he had set up, for example, William Scoggins at the Patton and 10th contact point, it not only connected Ruby to the JFK assassination, but, in the opinion of many, much worse, to the murder of a police officer, Tippit. Ruby was cornered. In an attempt at salvation, Ruby tried on the night of November 23rd, leading into the 24th, to notify the police department that Oswald was going to be murdered. He hoped that the police department would protect Oswald, and then he could plead to the hijacker's cutout that he had failed. And indeed, the FBI notified the police department in a dramatic fashion that Oswald's murder was imminent. But the department did nothing to protect Oswald. Of course, we can think of many variations of this scenario. Therefore, at that moment, for the CIA echelon in Dallas, the most reasonable course of action would be to locate potential executioners for the hijackers at the contact points in order to find a lead on who the hijackers were. This does not confirm that such assassins actually existed. We are examining how the person in charge of the CIA echelon saw the situation, and possibly Helms and Fitzgerald via radio communication when they were making the decisions.
How this solution explains everything.
This two-person narrative elegantly resolves the major discrepancies. The CIA operation. It accounts for Tippit as a CIA asset being at that exact spot and time. The honking car. The vehicle wasn't hunting Oswald. It was cueing the imposter inside. The theater sightings. The imposter explains the early Oswald arrivals and the second look-alike arrest confusion. Finally, it aligns with forensics. Gunpowder on Oswald's hand, from a revolver, but not his cheek, ruling out a rifle. As Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry admitted about Oswald, no one has ever been able to put him in the Texas School Book Depository with a rifle in his hand. While Curry expressed doubts about Oswald's role in JFK's death, the era's defining political scandal, he never questioned Oswald's guilt in Tippit's murder. This concludes the first part of the video. I have already published an article on X, available for free, containing my analysis of the eyewitness testimonies. The article is titled, the Tippit case, a coherent solution, and constitutes the bulk of Chapter 5 from my book, JFK Assassination, 3 Theorems, 3 Mathematical Proofs. As we have seen, the Warren Commission's handling of the Tippit murder was completely crazy. What is even more staggering is how readily this narrative was accepted by American society. This highlights a critical truth: the ease with which the public can be manipulated. This very susceptibility explains how the military-industrial complex has managed to siphon off $35 trillion over the last 70 years. Those who refuse to engage with the evidence I present in this video and in my article are the same people seeking to manipulate you today, right here and right now.